Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast in heaven. This week we welcome our first sponsor, Lakota Health Foods, where you can buy a 25-pound bag of popcorn or 24 pounds of popcorn in 12 2-pound bags. Unlike most sponsors, we sponsor them. They don't sponsor us.
Their first sponsor relationship.
Yes.
Could say.
Hope they appreciate this support. It's very good popcorn. It's for about $40 to your door. You're going to get more than a year's worth of premium popcorn. I would think you eat a lot of popcorn if you're going through 25 pounds. I do have a recommendation I want to start with before we signpost. This is mainly for parents. Do you remember an old punk band called the Dead Presidents? And they had like a song about peaches. Oh,
Presidents of the United States of America.
Okay. Sorry. Wrong band.
Yeah.
All right. One of the members of that band is now doing toddler music, and it is like excellent. And his new name is Casper Baby Pants.
That's great.
It's actually good enough that if you're not a parent, you just want to listen to some good music, look up Casper Baby Pants.
That's exciting. In our house, Peaches is a toddler song, by the way, but cool.
Signposting today. We're going to talk about the great philosopher Douglas Adams. We're going to get back to the manual and talk about the good news. The good news of the antediluvian period, which either means rain or flood.
It means rain.
It means before the rain.
Well, deluvian, whatever.
Okay. All right, so before the great rain in the Bible, there's a period of time, and we're going to mine that period of time for good news. All right, so let's get serious. Douglas Adams has been making kind of the Twitterverse news. Douglas Adams, if you don't know immediately who that is the author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay? I remember this being a very popular book. Did you remember it in high school? Was it talked about much?
So Ryan read it in high school, but I remember people talking about it in college and post-college, and I had sort of missed that whatever. And I never read it.
What did Ryan say about it?
His friend loved it and would reference it all the time, and Ryan kind of hated it and didn't get the appeal.
I read it, and I read two of the books, and I didn't kind of get the point. Like, this guy is actually quite a philosophical mind. I've now watched him kind of do more. He's not a theist, by the way, but he does quite a few talks that are just idea talks, kind of philosophical talks. But the appeal of the book, that I think why it was so popular amongst the high school age crew, is that it's very clever and humorous at the same time, and kind of ridiculous, right? Yeah. And so it's this clever, ridiculous sci-fi book. But the philosophical idea that's really embedded in it is that you work to get the answer, and when you get the answer, you don't yet have the question. And that's a strange claim, that you don't start with questions, you actually start with answers, And I was thinking about this because I think it dovetails with our good news podcasting, in that it feels like what you have to do is come to Scripture and the church with the right question. The church is the answer, or more particularly, maybe Scripture is the answer.
Yeah.
And but you can come to Scripture with a lot of weird questions and not get good results. Like you could ask Scripture, how was the world created, literally, and you will get a very strange answer. Or you could ask it. We talked about how, many people ask it how to get to heaven, or how to be a good person, or what. But really, what is this magical good news here? It's the interpretive question we're using, right? And I think this is also similar to even the Catholic Church itself, RCIA, because it's if someone is ripe enough to join our church, or to even want to benefit from it, you have to realize a few things before you ever get to RCIA. Yeah. You have to realize I'm thankful for my creation, or my life could be better, or there is real love out there that's not this fake love, or why do I keep ruining my own happiness all the time? You have to kind of learn a few things, before Catholicism is ready to speak to you, to start connecting dots.
Yeah. I had a friend who, when she got married, her husband was not Catholic, and he joined the church before they got married. And maybe they might have mistakenly thought that he had to be Catholic for them to get married. But it was sort of a thing that it was maybe more logistical, than like a deep conversion. And it would be like really annoying when he would want to like talk to me about the RCIA class, because it was like he hadn't had the deep insights to give these like little fine points about the faith any context, and it was like he would want to talk about the fine points, but they weren't interesting without the
right.
Yeah.
And these basic insights,
and sometimes it would be like oh, let's pick this apart, and I like just didn't want to do that,
right.
Yeah.
It feels like some people don't have the most basic insight, but they want to go run with theology because that's interesting in and of itself.
Yeah.
But it's actually kind of futile in and of itself. You know what I mean? It has to be accompanied with these insights. And these insights, unlike like what we're doing here in our faith, is like these insights are the most primary things. They're like the most advanced things and the most simple things and the first things. Like humility, is something that you need from day one, and you're going to need it on day 1000, And to the extent you forget it or think you've progressed beyond it, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
But I had a good story with the Bible being the answer. I had this friend, and we were starting this kind of spiritual conversation. I was kind of in this mode of like always recommending everyone just read as much Bible as they can. And I was getting ready to recommend that. And this person saw this coming and said, no. This friend had struggled with infertility in their marriage and was in a tough spot and had gone to scripture. And as one does, she started with page 1, right? And, you start on page 1, which is a terrible way to read the Bible, but she got all the way to Abraham. And Abraham's struggling with infertility with Sarah. And then they come up with an answer. And it's like, give Abraham Sarah's concubine. And that Bible, she said, she threw it across the room because, like, what the hell was that supposed to do for her, But that just shows you, like, you come with the question, and if it's not kind of the right question, you end up with a mess,
Yeah.
I loved that story because I felt like it was so pure of heart.
Yeah.
And, I think the person knew it wasn't the best question, but it's also, like, such a natural thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's also true that before you've ever asked a question about your being and reality, you're in reality and your being, And so that's kind of interesting because it's like what we have here is what God is working through in salvation history. And our starting point is essentially God's creation and plan and work. And then we go ask questions. So we kind of know what he did. Like, we know the answer, but we still have to figure out the reasons and the questions and connect the dots. And it's kind of the opposite of a utopian idea, where it's almost like you're trying to create what God should have done.
I feel like there's like an analogy in this when it's maybe women like myself become mothers and they had kind of interesting things going on, and then all of a sudden you're like just in the world of doing household chores and changing poopy diapers, and it's like you spend all this time racking your mind, like, what should I be doing? What should I change? What's my calling? What's, and like trying to find the complex, comforting answer or something, and it's like really like it's the thing that you're swimming in, and that's the poopy diapers and the dishes, is like the real thing.
I think this is like the Chesterton insight somehow. Like, Chesterton had multiple ideas that like the ordinary is actually the most exciting. And like one example is he has like the Man Alive book where this guy and this woman are married, and he makes the woman run away and go live in a new town. And then he goes to the new town and re-woos his wife. And a lot of times people in the town think he's a no good guy and he's going to take advantage of this woman, but actually they're already married. They just keep going through this little play in different towns, And there's another book, it might be Man Alive, but it was like the guy decided he wanted to go travel internationally. So he travels around the whole world, but he's really not there to travel internationally. He's really there to get home. He wanted to leave in order to really experience home again, you know?
I feel like there's a lot of plays on that theme. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Chesterton mines it over and over again. But it's like, there's some truth in that. Like, it's like somehow this like domestic life, that's like what winning looks like, or that's like, there's so much beauty in that. That is, that should be as exciting as any night on a quest.
This is like maybe a little bit embarrassing, but
Please tell.
Yes, like I'll get it's not that embarrassing. Whatever. Anyway, I'll get like really wrapped up in a project and then be like, oh my gosh, I didn't feed my kids lunch, you know? There was like a just period where I was feeling like really like restless and like, what should I be doing with my life? What should I be doing with my life? And I read the Beatitudes, and it was like so humiliating, but it was like, how about feed your kids? You know, like it was like I was just always like really doing these like side quests, you know, and the real thing was like feed the hungry, who are literally like right next to you.
Yeah, side quest is like good gamer terminology.
Yeah, I threw that in there because I thought you would like it, but yeah,
our gamer audience will love that you shouted out.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get on to the big question. Our interpretive question for Scripture is, what is this good news? Like, why was it the gospel? Why did it change people dramatically? How is it going to change us dramatically, and realize it? And not just in the New Testament, throughout the whole Bible. So we've already done all the way to the fall. And so now there's this period of man is fallen, and from then into the flood, the antediluvian period. There's a couple marks of this period. One is that there is no church for them to worship at. There are no scriptures or 10 commandments for them to reference. There is no hierarchy or priesthood for them to follow. And it was just people with God. And there were saints. You know, without sacraments, without any of these things, there were saints. And the most striking is Enoch. Mm-hmm. And it just says in Scripture that he walked with God and then he was with God. And we think of this as like, this is historically kind of thought of the same way Elijah just went up to heaven without dying. Enoch achieves a weird word, but somehow his purity and his sainthood, he just went to heaven, you know? And then the next person it talks about who walked with God
is Noah.
Noah, right, at the end of the antediluvian period. So something between Enoch and Noah is that things are falling apart. And an interesting commentary on this is by Anthony the Great, Saint Anthony the Great. So Saint Anthony is kind of the patriarchal desert father, like the first one. He's actually not the first one because he even references another guy, Paul, who inspired him to, or who he met when he first went out into the desert. So there was actually at least one desert father before Saint Anthony, but he's kind of considered the first great desert father. And apparently he's illiterate. But when I was in the Brookland neighborhood of DC, there was this old like Orthodox bookstore, and they had this thin little paperback that was just stapled together that was called The Letters of St. Anthony the Great.
Oh, wow.
So I got it, you know, and it's only like 3 letters. Like it must be like 10 pages, the whole thing, you know. And apparently he's illiterate, so maybe he dictated these letters, but I haven't seen them in any other compilations. And they're pretty interesting writings. And Anthony the Great thought of the Catholic Church as being founded by Moses. You know, he saw a continuity between Judaism and Catholicism that you should just say the Catholic Church was founded by Moses, you know. And it was founded by Moses, meaning like Moses actually built a tabernacle and a church, you know, and the very first scriptures. So before that, there were still people of God, but they just weren't part of a church, you know? And what he thought was that the stamp of our initial creation that like was on our consciousness, meaning like we were created kind of knowing what was right and wrong. I think this is hinted at in the words of Jesus too, that you once knew, and that it's through kind of like sin that this like initial kind of like stamp of consciousness is dulled and blurred. I think we see that in our own lives, that like by repeated sin, you actually like forget what's right and wrong, get more confused. That this is what happened in the antediluvian period. That like at first they had that stamp that was strong, and then as time went on, it got to the point there was only one person still walking with God or standing with God, and that was Noah.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
What's interesting about we're basically going through kind of a unique style. We're kind of doing something I think different here on the Simpleton Podcast, but we're kind of just doing salvation history in a different way. And salvation history is kind of your history or our history or my history. And we almost, the same way the church father would say that Moses passing through the Red Sea is like a baptism of, symbolically. That's also, maybe also this like stamp deadening through sin is also part of like our own spiritual journey, that you can see in salvation history.
Are you saying that our individual like salvation history story, like the salvation history of Laura Hehman, echoes the Bible because I'm like baptized and then I turn to God and then I turn away and then I turn back and then,
Or like in the Anthony the Great, this is kind of speculative theology. Let's just classify it as that. Great guy, speculating a little bit.
Great guy.
All right, understatement. Great guy, fantastic listener, by the way. So
best
when
desert father.
He is the best. He is the greatest desert father. There's no question. All right. So St. Anthony the Great, the way he's thinking about it is like, we needed the 10 Commandments. We needed Scripture. We needed the church because we needed bright line standards. We needed that those things to hold on to because we could no longer figure it out through our conscience. Like if someone's conscience was well formed, maybe they don't need the 10 Commandments to hold on to, right? And I am saying that like maybe one way to view salvation history is that that same history echoes in your own biography. And that you've had times in your life where you knew right from wrong and then you got deeply confused through probably sin, So I think that's interesting.
There's things that maybe it's like you knew in your heart were wrong and you sin and it becomes muddier. But there's like, I think in the modern world, a lot of like complicated problems, but I think it's like we kind of make them up or we dress them up as like more complex, like it all is the same kind of problems of the human heart and right and wrong. And
I think this is the theme early on in the manual, that this idea that like one of the great ways we escape God is complexity. So it's not just that the modern world is complex, which frankly I think it is more complex than a pre-modern world, but we'll make things complex. Like I have this idea that if you're a Stone Age tribe, pounding out your grain at the side of the river, you still probably overly complexified everything.
Yeah.
You're worried about what so-and-so thinks. And
yeah.
why this grain's no good, or, what you're going to do this winter, So I don't know. I kind of wonder, I feel like complexity is like real and maybe maybe modern complexity would be interesting to try to break down how it's so different, if there is a difference, but it does seem to be like the age-old problem.
Yeah, I think the like overlay of the digital world is provides like a landscape. I don't totally know what to, but I think we also get the self-justification, etc., and is the age-old thing, and we can dress it up with all the complexity, but it's just the age-old question.
I think what you're pointing out is that the sin that deadens our conscience and obscures our conscience is often something that's introducing complexity. Right. Okay.
And maybe we excuse it also because it's complex.
Oh, yeah. That's actually the cop-out, is the complexity.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So somehow in this antediluvian period, it starts out with people having this like remarkable relationship with God, not quite what it was in the unfallen world, but still not quite what it is now, where we need all these other things. But somehow it just degenerates, right? And it gets to the point that there's only one person still in tune and loving God in that way, right? And that person is Noah.
Like, we know specifically that Enoch and Noah walked with God. It doesn't say that about anybody else, but it definitely doesn't say that about anybody after Noah.
I believe it paints a picture of a degeneration. Like, I don't think it was like Enoch's the only guy walking with God and everybody else is completely crazy.
Yeah.
I think it was like by the time in Noah, things had degraded.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and then after Noah, nobody else is described in that way in the Bible.
Oh, is walking with the Lord.
Uh-huh. It's like David was a man after God's heart,
But Noah, Moses talked to God face to face, so it's neat that, like I would love to be called a guy who walked with God, right? No one else gets that title after Noah, but.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting in light of St. Anthony's, speculation, about, man being closer and sort of imprinted with God, but that there were men that were able to walk with God before the flood is interesting. And we get this promise with the flood and no longer are men walking with God. I don't know.
My summary of the big picture would be the fall happens. Things don't go terribly necessarily. Enoch walks with God. We have great saints and they don't need these like churches and sacraments. They're just saints, and they walk with God. And then things degenerate. And we know that the only other person who's said to walk with God is Noah, right? And he's at the end during the degeneration, but he's still making it work. But most people, somehow the faith and relationship with God has failed, right? Does that sound true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when Noah stands with God, he's made to be ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
He's made to build this ark. It is a shame, it's like everyone can mock this thing. And then the flood happens, and there's two things I think that are big takeaways here. Like, one is that this is absolutely a disaster. This is terrible. This is why it should not be on preschool walls. It's a complete annihilation, right?
Yeah.
And like, the other, and the promise God makes after the flood is that he will not do it again.
Yeah.
And so you could understand that as a very limited promise. He will not do the flood again.
Yeah.
Or you could think of it more symbolically that he is going to work to save humanity, not reboot or erase humanity. Because the flood, in a way, is like a reboot, and that is good news, that we're not to expect like this, like decimating event, we're actually looking to save the world, save ourselves, save the world. And that's a much more hopeful attitude than thinking God's going to hit the reboot button on earth.
One thing that we haven't talked about is that God uses, it's like Noah is a man who walked with God, but there's like not that much about Noah, but we know he got like really drunk one time and embarrassed himself and was naked and his sons had to cover him up. And it's interesting that this is the man that walked with God and God chooses to kind of be the leader of this reboot.
Great. I like that observation because that's also my same point about King David, one of the greatest saints. Also, we basically only know him by his disasters. Also true of the apostles.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And David's disasters seem larger than the apostles, although he didn't desert at the foot of the cross, But maybe that, I don't know. It's interesting, But the interesting other theme that's coming out of this that's going to manifest itself over and over again in salvation history is this idea of someone getting in this situation where they're like this complete, I don't have a better word for it, but they're kind of like the righteous underdog, right? Like everything is against them. They're carrying the weight of everything and they're choosing God over everyone else and over everything else, And I feel like so many times in zeal, we want to like stand up for God and it's like this exciting thing. And it's almost never real when you do that, you know? But when it's real is when it's a shameful thing and you just have to do it and everyone hates you for it, but you're just going to do it and you know it's going to be okay because you're with God, you know? It's almost like you can almost tell when you're really the righteous underdog by the emotional response you're having.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be intoxicating.
No, I feel like there are a lot of times when I'm like, you know, stressing about like the social cost of something, or did I do or say the right thing? How will this be perceived? And then it's like, well, no, like God is taking care of this, you know, I did the best I could and God is with me. And so it like doesn't matter, but it's very difficult, you know, to overcome that.
So during this antediluvian period, people are walking with God, they're relating with God directly, which is an important thing to know, you know. There's also this idea of the salvation of the righteous underdog, which appears over and over again in Scripture, which is good news. It means that when the whole world's against you, God can save you and triumph with you, you know. And the other thing is that God doesn't really plan on rebooting stuff. He plans on saving it, you know. And all this is good news. And that is our manual chapter for today. All right, we will start with the patriarchal period after this. God bless.
Cool.
All right. Listen to the Simpleton Podcast.
Like, subscribe.
Carry on. Goodbye.
Goodbye.